Welcome to the In-Betwixt and In-Between. This is Leadership Limbo, a podcast aimed at helping leaders embrace the discomfort and power of leading themselves and others in the midst of it all. We blend real insight with practical tools to help you lead with self-awareness, purpose, and influence wherever you are on your leadership journey. I am one of your co-hosts, John Clark, and with me today, Mr. Josh Hugo, my friend. How are you?
Hey, John, I'm doing well. You're listening to this after Thanksgiving, and so hopefully everyone had a lovely day with the family and got some good food.
Yep, we're sitting here in anticipation of the food coma, as we talked about last week, so we won't dive into our preferences on stuffing again, but looking forward to the holiday. And if you're listening to this in December, hopefully you're looking forward to the end of the year as well.
Yeah,
right?
it's holiday season. It's also my experience, working mostly in schools. We had, true time off, like a week off for Thanksgiving, 2 weeks off for the Christmas break. I mean, for those who know, teachers and educators hardly ever work. So just tons of breaks, the time off. Yeah. But no, that was a perk, is that you did have bona fide time off. But moving into a corporate role last year, it was interesting because it's technically not vacation time. Like you have a day off maybe for Christmas, a day off for Thanksgiving, and maybe the day after. But nobody worked. Like nobody was working.
But they are also, to give our educator friends credit, they're not experiencing the intensity of the 3 weeks between Thanksgiving and Christmas and that comes with that preparation and keeping kids together.
Obviously joking about the intensity. A truly needed break. Honestly, if there wasn't that break, I don't think anyone would come back in January. Yeah. So the break season's coming up. Important time for leaders, though. It's a good chance for leaders and managers to really use some of this space to kind of do a combination of closing out. Some of this is your end of year reflection time. Some of this is strategy work for the next year. Your finances and your quarter four reports are probably getting wrapped up. So I do think it's an important chance to recharge, rest, and reset, but it's also a good strategic time to think ahead to next year and think about development. So
for sure.
Yeah.
Well, why don't I do a little reminder to our friends here? We'll do this at the front end today, but just to remind people to subscribe, follow, download wherever you get your podcast. We are on the YouTube channel. If you subscribe to that, we're trying to do, you'll see more clips come up as well to catch little bite-sized pieces of what we're saying, but also trying to put out little polls for the community and things that you can participate in there, learning more and more about that platform. So, wherever you subscribe or follow, please do that. And leave some reviews. Thanks to folks who did that this week. Some good reviews that will help us kind of push this further. And then, probably most important is just share it with others, especially in this holiday season. Just give them something to listen to and take part in and hopefully find useful. So,
absolutely.
Yeah, with that, Josh, I want to turn it to you to remind us a little bit of where we were last week, what our homework was before we take it into today's topic.
Yeah, absolutely. So last week, we really talked a lot about the development square and less about the theory or the framework, but about how to be an effective developer of others. And we talked a lot about kind of the posture of is somebody distancing or coming towards you, and the importance of asking questions as opposed to telling people what to do. And so the homework last week was really thinking about where a specific person you had put in the development square was, and how were you thinking about developing them? Like, how are you putting the ratio through good questioning, through the right level of support and challenge, depending on which stage of development they're at? How are you thinking of actually operationalizing and implementing not just the framework itself, but actually turning it into learning for the person or people that you're managing? So
and
hopefully that exercise, go ahead, John.
Well, I was just saying how you think about that ratio based on the gradual release discussion we talked about too, how you hand more and more off to them eventually, right?
That's right. Right. And so hopefully that was a good grounding for some reflection. Again, kind of as I just mentioned, this is the time of year. I know I've talked to a number of people recently who are in the midst of their end of year reviews. And so if you're a manager implementing those and you're listening to this, and maybe this isn't the tool or framework your network or district or organization uses, but it could be incorporated somehow, think about it. I do think there's a lot of opportunity, and this is a great window of time to set the tone for development. So that being said, John wants to introduce to our listeners, John, a little bit of an angle that we didn't get to quite yet, but we talked about and we really think would be an important one to consider for all of those who are listening, who are managers, but also being developed by other people.
Yeah, and I think that last thing you talked about is this is a little bit about being developed. So we're still talking about developing others, and the last several episodes have been very centric on how do I set my mindset to be willing to develop others and to be prepared for that? How do I know where people are in terms of where they're on the development journey? And then finally, like, what are actual tools to think about the coaching and teaching, right? And today is about how are we as people, whether because you're a middle manager, frankly, if you're a senior leader, or if you're an individual contributor, how am I setting my posture? How am I setting myself up to be developed? And how am I open to that? And so we think that's really important. And we talked a little bit about last week. I think Josh did a great job of bringing the concept of pursuer and distancer to us. And we talked a lot about that from the angle of you as the manager. Are you simply just pursuing people, but for some reason they're distancing themselves from you? Or we even talked about how sometimes that can be reversed, where people are coming towards you, but you're distancing yourselves because you think maybe I don't need to develop them. But we actually want to get on the other side of that equation is when you are the person who is needing to be developed or is a position to be developed and learn, how do you set yourself up? And so, I want to start a conversation with Josh and I here about, I think, what's your posture? What's your posture when it comes to showcasing to others that you're willing to be developed? Okay.
Yeah.
Um, and so, that's where I would actually ask our listeners to really sit with themselves at some point and say, what is my disposition, my posture, my willingness to showcase to others that, hey, I'm ready to learn, right?
Hmm.
Think about yourself as a student in school, university, graduate school, whatever. You go into that hopefully thinking that the reason to be here is to learn stuff, to get information and to get it to apply it, right? So what was your posture in that setting versus once you get to the workforce? I think people tend to think it's about getting stuff done and
Mm.
doing things. And so we perhaps lose some of that learner mindset. But the
Mm.
really effective folks are the folks that go into things wanting to learn, wanting to know more importantly what they can get from others, right? What can I learn from your experience so that I can get better, right? And so I would just ask people to take some time generally beyond what we say here and ask, am I presenting myself as a learner to folks for my own good, but also for the good of the team so that we're actively working together better because of that? And so
Hmm.
you know, we can talk about a few of these. Let's kind of go into them. So the first one is this idea of not distancing anymore. We talked about how as a manager, you can over pursue people, right? You become the hero. You try to do things for them. But also, if they're coming towards you because they want to work with you and they want to help you, what are you doing to come back to them a little bit, right? It's not just on them for them to create the conditions where you want to be developed. It's also on you showcasing to them, hey, I'm ready for this relationship. Let's do this together, right? So
Yeah.
coming towards others and not distancing. Josh, thoughts on how people can do that or how they can effectively do that to showcase, I'm not distancing myself from you anymore. I want to be developed. What do you think in there?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's a choice, right? It's literally just a
Yes.
choice. And I think there's a lot of things that can get in the way. Your ego can be one of them.
Yeah.
Well, my manager, they did other stuff, but they don't do what I do. So what could I actually learn from them?
Yeah.
Right. I think that there at times can be a shift of almost like belief that the person who is in a position to develop you could develop you. I think that if you can look around at everyone around you and say, there's truly nothing I can learn from all of these people, then, I would be incredibly surprised. In
Yeah.
fact, I would say that I think you'd be wrong. I think that there's something that you can learn from everyone. And I think that it's a mindset decision to say, this manager, they worked in sales, but I'm in marketing. What are they going to teach me? Well, I think if you're asking yourself that question in a cynical sort of way, you've already answered it in your mind. Your answer is they're not going to be able to teach me anything.
No, totally.
What if you were to flip that around and kind of create this idea of what could I learn from this person, right? So
Yeah.
I think that the first thing I would say to this idea of choosing to come towards requires you to wrestle with why you might be distancing.
Yeah.
And those reasons of distancing are often going to be tied to your ego. And I think it's something we all probably do. In fact, for a fact, I know I do it. And I think that when you're operating from that position or that posture, you're kind of closing yourself off to the opportunity to learn from that person and inherently by that choice distancing yourself.
Yeah, and I think that fits in with, I think you just nailed it. One of these is the question you can ask yourself: Am I receptive and open to others,
Yeah.
to ideas, to new things, to learning from others, or am I cynical and closed? So you mentioned one.
What do you think cynical sounds like? Like, I have a thought in my mind about it, but what do you think, John? Like, when you think about somebody who's cynical,
Yeah, I
what
mean, I think the first one is, oh, they don't know what it's like for me at this level. They've never experienced it this way. They
Mhm.
haven't faced the barriers or have, or well, they just don't see the way I'm doing it, right? Whatever it might be.
Uh-huh.
Look, we've talked about ways that we've done that in the past. I think when we talked about modes of being developed last week, I think you mentioned one that you're going to close down immediately if someone kind of provides you personally with a step-by-step approach to things, right?
Yeah.
And so you're already cynical, like, "Ugh, look at this person telling me how I have to do things." Well, maybe if you opened it up to some questions, they're just providing that for guidance, but maybe they are more open to you approaching it in a different way. Or maybe they have strong rationale why you have to do it a certain way. And so we all fall into it, right? But cynical, I think, often more than thing is just that simple question of like, well, they don't understand what it's like for me.
Yeah, I think the word "well," they don't understand. The other word that comes to mind is "but." You know, yeah, I'm receptive,
Mhm.
but I don't think that they understand,
Sure.
right? And I think that, like, maybe that's not cynical, maybe that's a little bit, like, sensitive or critical, but I think if you're catching yourself saying, I would learn from this person, but, they don't have a PhD," or "I would learn from this person, but they haven't done this job long enough," or "I would" the more that you find excuses as to why you wouldn't learn from somebody else, probably means that you have a certain degree of cynicism coming into play. And I think that you bring up a great example. Like, if let's just live apply that. So, if my manager said, "Hey, Josh, here's the step by step pieces," I could go two ways. I could say, "Well, I'm going to shut down and say, well, this person doesn't understand what I need. This won't work for me." Or I
Hmm.
could be curious and say, "Wow, man, you put a lot of thought into this approach to helping me develop, and I really
Right.
appreciate it. I'm more than happy to try this approach." I also can share with you that one of the things I've learned about myself is that I do well with an outcome that's painted pretty specifically, but the steps to get there are left a little bit more broad. And would you be willing to run an experiment where maybe it's a little bit of a blend of what you've shared with me and how I know I can really take ownership? And you could ask that as a question and ask it humbly, right? Ask that question humbly and say, like, I don't believe the only answer to my question is yes, right? I think a lot of the time we ask questions where we believe the only solution or the only answer is kind of a leading answer, like no or yes, based on how I ask it. But you could do that. I could do that. If somebody presented an approach to learning that wasn't quite my style, I could just discount them and say, this person doesn't get me. Or to your point, John, I could ask a question and frame it openly with curiosity and then open up this collaboration between you and your manager as opposed to just shutting it down.
Yeah. Well, and so we talked about one of the key points you got into this one too is the idea of humble curiosity. And,
Yeah.
that there is a way that curiosity, you can think you're being curious, but you're really not. You may be curious to prove a cynical point, or you're digging up things to prove your point. So there is a downside to curiosity if it's intended more to prove a point. But
Right.
humble curiosity is actually you change your mindset. And I just think driving with this example, and we've said it, the tendency can be, I can't believe this person's giving me this prescriptive way of doing things. Do they think I'm an idiot? And then the way you go to them is like, why do you think I need this? Or I don't like this, or why don't you get me? There's that sort of curiosity
That's
versus
not humble.
does not, right? So the humble curiosity is real important because you start with the mindset of what do I not know here? Or perhaps I wonder why they're presenting it in this way. And again, you go back to them and you learn that they might think, oh, I just really wanted to make sure, knowing that this is maybe the first time you've done it, or you've done it but under different conditions, that I wanted you to see some steps to do it. Well, then you might learn, well, hey, why don't we have a conversation about what that means for you and how you drive it? Or they might have really good reasons why you have to do it that way. You talked about last week that if you're going to set up a criteria for success and the process is important, then name that as part of the criteria for success, right? So my point being is if you get curious versus, or if you get humbly curious versus almost angry and resentful and driving at questions that put the other person's question into character, I think that's an interesting thing, right?
Yeah.
So
Can I build on that just
yeah, please
briefly
talk
too?
about that a bit.
Yeah, I think the curiosity piece is not just about the idea of if somebody proposes or shares something with you about this is how I think you should be developed, but I think it's also how you just come into the overall process of your development too. Of like, I'm curious about what I could still do, like where I could still grow, and not putting the burden purely on like almost assuming this power dynamic of the person who's developing me is the person who has all the answers, and my job is to ask questions to get the answers from them,
Yeah.
as opposed to like I'm coming in with a curiosity to engage in dialogue. Think of this person as a coach. Think of this person as somebody to help unlock new ways of thinking, but not as the person who holds all the keys and all the answers. Like the answers are going to
Yeah.
be inside of you. And so it's also not just asking questions to pull out from others, because when you're doing that, it's not, I feel like there's a distinction between like you're kind of coming towards a person when you are asking, but it could easily kind of move quickly into I'm asking questions to kind of ascertain whether I can trust your answers, which
Yeah.
puts the burden on the developer as opposed to on yourself. And I think as a learner, it's really critical that you're coming in with the belief the burden of your development is truly on your shoulders, because at the end of the day, that manager is not probably going to be part of your life for a long period of time. And if you look at that as like, well, I didn't get developed. Sure, there's a responsibility on both parties, but what are you going to go back 5 years later and say, you didn't develop me 5 years ago, and that's why my career sucks right now? That's not an effective way to go through life. That's a victim
Yeah.
mentality. And
And
so, yeah.
I want to jump in there. I mean, think about it this way, folks. If you think about what we talked about the last couple of weeks, let's say you're a manager, or if you're not a manager, put yourself in your manager's shoes, and they do everything we've talked about. They've identified where you're at on the development spectrum. They've been really thoughtful about what that means to set you up in terms of practices, gradual release. They've done all those things. They've had good conversations with you to kind of learn about how you're feeling with that, or tip to those conversations. They can do all those things, but then if you were completely closed off, or you get cynical when they're trying to develop you, or you start worrying about your ego over what they're trying to do, it won't work, like no matter what they do. And so this is very much a two-way street. And I would argue if you were a person who's set up to be developed, even if the person developing you is not very good at it, but you open yourself up to other opportunities, you learn from others, you find ways, you get a lot further that way than just relying on your manager. So that's
Right.
where I do think a lot of times we're here talking about how managers need to be better at that, because it's going to unlock something in people a lot quicker. But the first step, honestly, is how am I willing to be developed to a certain degree, right? It's certainly it's a collaborative relationship, and that's the last point here. You have to believe that this is a collaborative relationship, but both sides do, and you have to present yourself in a way that's collaborative. And I think that's going to open both sides of people up to a proper relationship to help with that. But man, just starting from a place of cynicism in terms of like nobody wants to develop me, or frankly, the negative way that we talked about in episode 3, that people think about management's just being a taskmaster versus developing folks. If you help set up the person to develop you and you show interest in that, they're going to be more effective at it, and you're going to get a lot more out of it too. Agree? Thoughts? Differences?
No, I think that's spot on. Yeah, I think the thought that came to mind in kind of like a metacognitive level is think about the value of your own modeling of being an effective learner, right? So you are a manager and you are training others.
Yeah.
What would you hope from them to be, and as far as like how do they show up as a learner? If you yourself are not showing up that way as a learner with your own manager, with your own supervisor,
Yeah.
there's a really good chance that that degree of misalignment internally, that degree of dissonance, frankly, in what you expect of others, but you're not doing yourself, that's going to show up, right? Like you can't give what you don't possess. And if you don't possess a learner's mindset as a manager, how can you reasonably expect the people you are managing to show up in that same capacity?
Yeah.
Right? It would be hypocritical, but frankly, beyond just the philosophical problem with it, it's probably not going to play out in the way that you would hope, because if you can't do it yourself, it's very unlikely to be manifest in the way that you're doing it with those that you actually develop as well.
Yeah. I mean, good jumping point into the next portion. So Josh,
Yeah.
lead us about this question. What if I think my manager isn't interested in developing me? I
Sure.
think,
Yeah.
unfortunately, fair or not, I think that's where a lot of people in workplaces think like, oh, my manager is
Yeah.
just not good at it or they're not interested in it. How do we handle that? How do we work through that?
Yeah. I mean, that it's probably true, right? There's probably the reality that that might exist. Like we can't rule
Sure.
out the possibility that you have a manager who maybe isn't interested or possibly not as capable of developing you. And that's a possibility. But the first question I would ask is run an experiment. Like maybe it's a story you're telling yourself,
Yeah.
right? Like, and when we tell ourselves a story, which, we all do, we want to make sense of what we're looking at. You look for evidence to support that story. Well, they didn't give me any praise last time, or, they went straight to a critical piece of feedback, but my partner over here, Jen, she got positive praise, right? We look for the evidence to support the thing that we already believe. That's just kind of human nature. But what if the story you were telling yourself about your manager was wrong? And what I'm saying is, first of all, to be clear, it might not be fully wrong. But what if it was? Run the experiment of saying, maybe if I told myself a story of my manager is really trying hard to develop me, we just haven't figured out a way to see eye to eye on how that development really looks. And I want to look for evidence of how they're trying to do this. Maybe for me, I prefer a 30-minute sit down, but they show up in the hallway and they walk past my desk and say, "Hey, Josh, how's the day going? Could I give you a quick minute of feedback?" To me, I might feel attacked. I might feel like this is inappropriate. I might feel like this is not helpful. But in the mind of the manager, they might be thinking of this as the way to try to bring help and support to you, right? Now, you need to have the conversation at some point about what is working and what's not. But if you start looking for evidence proving that the manager that you are working with is actually trying to develop you, and you run this experiment, it might help shift your own internal mindset and look at things differently. So I guess the word here would be to reframe. What happens if you run a reframe experiment? And for those listening, I'm not just posing this hypothetically. Like somebody listening to this probably has a boss that you think doesn't care about your development. What if you were to spend the next 2 weeks telling yourself consciously a different story and looking for small pieces of evidence that support that new story? What would that do for your practice? What would that do for your mentality? What do you think, John?
Yeah. And I think the other thing comes is sometimes this framework or this mindset, it can be a defense mechanism. You know, maybe actually there's some in it, like some things that you're feeling about yourself, like you're not feeling good about your work or you're feeling not confident. Maybe you're in that pit of despair. I don't know what it is. And so you use that as a way of saying, well, is this someone else's fault? Are they not developing me properly? Do they not want to develop me? Again, I think to your point, run an experiment, but also do some thought exercises of how you change. Like when you see yourself shifting towards like my manager never wants to help me, or I have a crummy manager, just think, okay, well, let's look for evidence of where that's not the case. Or perhaps they're actually thinking they're empowering me and I need to grasp those opportunities. So again, I think your point, this isn't to excuse away good, bad managers. We wouldn't have a podcast if there weren't bad managers out there because we want to help people be better at it. But also ask yourself, is this my mindset? Is this a defense mechanism? And perhaps part of the reason I'm blinded to what they're trying to do is because I'm not open to it. Right.
Right.
We'll talk about what that conversation looks like then, Josh. So you run the experiment,
Yeah.
but beyond that, like how do you engage with your manager? How do you engage with them about this topic as well?
Yeah. I mean, I think that you have to see your role of advocating for what you need as an important practice as a professional. And it can be difficult. Find a person to practice the conversation with. But I believe that, okay, I'm running this thought experiment. It's helping shift a little bit of how I'm thinking about this. At some point, whether it's in your one-on-one or your quarterly review or your mid-year or end of year, and I wouldn't wait long because this kind of dynamic can start to eat away at your confidence, at your sense of efficacy, and frankly, it might be eating away at your manager's sense of confidence and efficacy towards and with you. Like these types of things, like don't sit around waiting for the conversation to happen. Don't expect, like I was talking about this recently with somebody I was doing some coaching with. I said, you are spending way more time thinking about your manager than they're probably thinking about you.
Yeah.
And the nature of like that often leads us to believe that if we're unaware of that, we're sitting around thinking, oh, man, they must be sitting around thinking about tomorrow is a day that I'm going to actually tell Josh what I think he needs to hear. The fact of the matter is that it would be nice, but it probably won't happen. So the importance of having a conversation to say, hey, John, I really do appreciate the way that that you're trying to help me grow as a professional. One, I want to be really clear with you. I know this is my responsibility. Like my personal and professional growth is really important. I wanted to share a few thoughts. One of the things that I really appreciate that you're doing is you're bringing me consistent feedback and details about what's working or what's not. One of the places, though, that I know is really important for me is to have a little bit more of like a step-by-step or a manual that helps me to really understand how to go from A to B. Is that a resource that you have access to? Is that someone our network has? But I do think it's really important to be clear with others about what you might need to grow and invite that in curiously. Oh, no, John or Josh, we don't have that manual here. That's really helped for me to think about like the way that you want to grow. Let me do some thinking on that. Can we follow up in a couple of weeks? Or if they don't ask that part, you could say, hey, could we check in on this in a couple of weeks? Like, I know this may not be possible yet, but I just wanted to share with you, like, my growth is really important to be able to bring impact to this company, to this business, to this school. Can we come back to this in a few weeks? I'll do some thinking as well. But I think you have to elevate these conversations. If you just hold them in your head and you're just working on mindset alone, insights don't lead to actions unless you actually go out and do it.
Yeah. Also, and I think there's huge value in the type of conversation you're talking about. I would also not overcomplicate this. Like sometimes the conversation isn't a big sit down with, hey, I have these feelings about how I'm being developed. Can we talk about it? It can just be, hey, Josh, I really want to try to do this. I want to try this new thing. Can I try it? Can you help me to learn how to do it? Or, hey, you've really given me this opportunity. I
Yeah.
think I'm ready to do it more on my own now.
Yep.
Or
That's right.
you've been doing
Great
something and you
example.
say, hey, I know you know this pretty well. There's this thing I'm kind of stuck on, or I want to see if there's a different way to do it. Can you talk to me? So some of it is just that these micro moments of inviting in because you're truly curious about
Right.
learning more. Not that it's manipulative, not that it's brown nosing. It's like, I want to learn. And part of that better sets the conditions for them to know that you're open to that,
That's
right?
right. Yeah.
And
Great
that
example.
you're
Yep.
eager for that. And then that will trigger some things in them how they develop. So don't not everything about this advocacy or this collaborative relationship is, I mean, that those are important conversations to have, especially this time of year when you think about the longer term view of your development. But don't forget about just the micro opportunities to seek out that collaboration
Great
and that
point.
feedback. And now, again, don't be annoying. Like, don't go asking them every time you need something because you're double checking and you don't want to do it wrong. That shows a little bit more like fear and inadequacy that sometimes can rub your boss the wrong way if they're like, I think you can figure this out on your own. But when it's truly an opportunity for you to learn from them or get advice, I think you tackle it. You know what I mean? So
Yep.
I would
Yeah.
just argue that some of the advocacy and collaborative relationship is just the way that you go about asking questions of each other and figuring things out and learning and opening yourself up to new ideas. Um, that I think will chart a different course for the relationship versus if you guys are kind of keeping your distance from each other and then come together in a big meeting to talk about, well, what does development look like?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Um, and that goes for managers too. It can't just be like, I want to talk about how you get developed. Well, what are you doing along the way to learn a little bit more about how they want to be developed or new opportunities they want to try? So
Yeah.
if you create that two-way, the development opportunities are going to kind of explode, in my opinion. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Love that.
yeah,
Yeah. Great conversation, John. I think it's real important to recognize like there's always a two-way street, and there's also analogies to not only you're managing others and developing others, but you're also being managed and developed. And
yeah,
so it's a little bit of like practice what you preach. And if you, I really think that phrase, and it's not my own creation, it's pretty common in kind of the giant community, but like you cannot give what you do not possess. And this is such an important kind of meta space to like live out the way that you want the people you're developing to act. You should be doing something the same way or
yeah,
similarly.
yeah. Great. Yeah, great conversation. Yeah, let's just nail that point that we really want to push people. Hopefully, you've used the last 2 episodes to learn how you can develop others. The challenge here today, which we'll get into homework in a minute, though, is really think about what's your role in being developed.
Yeah.
Whether as and also if you're a manager, people are going to see you leaning into that curiosity as well. That you're
Yeah.
leaning into that, and that's gonna be a model that they operate off of.
That's right.
And give it, but anyway, wrap it up for us, Josh. What's our next topic here or idea you want to chat about?
Yeah, I mean, I think we can just hit this as a high note. That conversation was good, and I know that we're coming up on time here, but you're listening to this a couple days, hopefully after Thanksgiving. It is the season of gratitude. I think that we'll probably come back to a topic like this in the future in greater depth, but we've talked a little bit about communication styles and communication tendencies and what people need. But I think one of the places that some people are really naturally great at delivering and some people are really great at receiving also happens to be a practice that some people are pretty poor at delivering and some people really don't instinctively or outwardly ever say they want to receive. And that is gratitude. And so as we think a little bit about even through the process of these end of years and ongoing development conversations, the space for gratitude is really important. And what does gratitude look like? It looks like a lot of things, but it looks like a genuine, humble degree of appreciation for someone or something else. And the fact of the matter is, only 15% of employees, based on a recent survey, say managers regularly express gratitude at work. And 35% of employees have even admitted that their manager has never even thanked them. If you're a manager who maybe leans towards like straight shooting and just telling it how it is and kind of that mentality of like, I don't believe this fits into the workplace, understand that employees who feel strongly recognized are 45% less likely to leave an organization. It shows that when leaders have a high trait of gratitude, they're dispositionally thankful. It links to more humble behavior, greater team voice, higher team innovation in the teams that they lead. So gratitude is not just like a morally or ethically valuable concept to practice. It has pragmatic outcomes for your team. And it's a space that I think I would just push to say, hey, this is an encouragement for everyone to really emphasize that at this time of year, but always. What do you think, John?
Yeah, totally. Don't think it's in some ways it's good to talk about it after Thanksgiving or to hear it after Thanksgiving because it should be, I think, a position you take at all times of the year
Yeah, great point.
with everyone around you. Like one of the ways I'm showing gratitude, and there are certainly different ways to show gratitude. I do think as managers, you can't just give gratitude the way you like to receive it. You do have to think about the way others like to hear it and know it and understand it. But also, if you're on a team, I was working with some folks lately where it started going down this rabbit hole where the folks were like, "Well, I don't even think our managers know how we like to get gratitude or receive it." And I just turned the question, hey, I think it's very point the job of managers. How do your managers like to get gratitude? Crickets. You know what I mean? So let's not forget that whether it's your role with your kids or your partner or your friends or person you're managed by or people you're on a volunteer organization with, people like to hear gratitude. I've been struck by that with my in-laws who have been here for just like 36 hours and the number of kind things and we're so proud of you and just gratitude they show all the time is something that I know I
Yeah.
do a better job of. So
Well,
embrace it, whether it's after Thanksgiving or it's the depths of March, think about how you're doing that.
I don't want you to sell yourself short. But I do think that you and my experiences with you as a friend, but as a leader, I think this is something that you're actually very good at.
Oh,
And I
thanks.
think that you are genuinely a grateful person and express it well. And I think that even as a person who does feel gratitude, I'm not as external with that. And I know it's a place that I'm often caught off guard when people are like, hey, that was really good to hear that. Because in my mind, in my heart, I'm like, oh, I feel this.
Mhm.
So I do think it's not even that it's not a set of extremes of people who love to give gratitude and people who hate to give gratitude. There's probably a lot of us who hold on to these feelings and we don't necessarily realize that we're not communicating it as outwardly as we can and
Yeah.
as we should. So my own call to action before our other homework is find ways to express gratitude transparently, openly, and kind of just remove that little discomfort because it is actually such a liberating experience to express it, not just to receive it. And the benefits of expressing
Yeah.
gratitude are also statistically significant in terms of health, longevity, fulfillment, productivity. Give some gratitude, receive some gratitude, but let's lean into that this season. So, John, do you want to let us know kind of what the other exercise to close out today will be before we wrap up?
Yeah. So homework for today, just what is your posture towards being developed? We just want you to reflect on that. And, what's a small thing you can do with your manager or with someone who's simply charged with developing you? What can you do to like run towards them a little bit? What question can you ask? What opportunities can you seek out? Where can you advocate in a way that will feel to them like, oh, this person's really owning their development. So think
Yeah.
on that this week and hopefully try something new. So yeah, with that said, Josh, take us out.
Yeah, well, thanks again for joining us. We hope you have a wonderful week happening as you're listening. We, of course, always say this, but please download our podcast, share this podcast with others, leave us a review and a rating, and we'd love to connect further, so find a way to contact us. That's all across social media spaces, personal emails, etc., professional emails. Please share this, and I've said that a few times, so if that point is not understated enough, it's said again.
Take us out.
Yeah. So until next time, this has been Leadership Limbo, where we make space for the tension and tools for the journey. We'll see you in the in-between.